Fighting for air as much as to see, Requiem peered through the gap that Gio had created, but with even his heightened senses he could see nothing. Straining to see, he was almost blinded as a light as bright as the midday savannah sun came beaming through two large oval eye sockets. More elephants began to rise from the ground in front of them, as they were joined by a new wave from the darkness. Instead of charging Gio and the others, however, they turned their attention to the eyes and made a wall in front of the group. Gio loosened his grip on his friends, allowing them to slip out from underneath him. All four lay on their stomachs so they could stare through the legs of the elephants to see what was coming. But suddenly, the silence returned and the eyes disappeared. "What? Where did it go? Come back," whispered Uracil anxiously. Thrusting his hand out in front of them and shaking it wildly, Requiem hissed, "Everyone, listen to me. On 3, cry havoc as loudly as you can. Got it?" They had an inkling of what Requiem was thinking, what he was desperately hoping for, and nodded in agreement. In full voice, Requiem called out, 1! Everyone held hands. 2! They took a deep breath. 3! Havoc! More splintering of bones could be heard in the distant darkness. This was followed with a second mighty roar, a glimpse of yellow eyes, and then smash! A giant tiger, as tall as the black elephants themselves, pounced into the main arena and hurtled into the side of the elephant wall. Shards of bone and ivory flew in every direction. Havoc rounded on the remaining elephants, snarling and baring saber-toothed fangs which were every bit as mighty as the elephant's tusks, before tearing off several heads with a roar and a single swipe of his clawed paw. Almost as quickly as Havoc devastated one elephant, another rose from the ground. Even the dust itself formed bones. It seemed that mighty though Havoc was, he was fighting an infinite enemy. Havoc charged once more, sending the last few elephants in front of the group into oblivion, before continuing to charge headlong towards Uracil, who wore a look of abject terror. Instead of devouring him in one killer bite, however, Havoc gently lifted Uracil up onto his own back. Elated to be riding such a powerful beast, Uracil lost all reserve and gave out an uncharacteristic and exuberant "Yee-haw!" "Uracil, use the string to make a harness around his neck," called Requiem, dodging regenerating skeletons. Havoc obliterated 2 more elephants with his back legs as he turned and rounded on the group, this time flinging Freya onto his back as he passed her. She too shouted triumphantly before holding on to Uracil for dear life. Scrabbling over to Gio, Requiem panted, "Look at the head. It's been sinking all this time. You're the only one strong enough to stop it." Gio needed no further prompting. Standing tall, he shouted out to Havoc with his fist thrust into the air, 4! Snarling, Havoc thundered over to Gio. As he passed him, he held out his right paw with claws retracted, span, and flung Gio over to the sinking skull. "Oh no, you don't!" Gio shouted as he landed in front of the skull. Slapping his palms together and taking a sumo stance, Gio charged one of the ribs to the side of the skull, felling it. "Energy! Energy! I need energy!" Gio muttered as he slapped his clothes. With a flash of inspiration, he thrust a hand into his pocket and pulled out a handful of premium Turkish delight. Pausing, he looked at the sweets in his hand. "It seems such a waste. I'll lose all that sweet taste and soft gooey texture." The skull jolted further into the ground. "But if I don't do this, Requiem will turn me into a soft gooey texture." Converting the Turkish delight into energy, Gio lifted the rib effortlessly, rammed it into the eye socket of the skull, and heaved down with all his might. Straining, he could stop the skull slipping any further, but even his great strength could not bring it back up. From the distance, he heard Requiem's voice, "Coming through!" Gio dived to the other side of the skull as Havoc, with Uracil, Freya, and now Requiem on his back, launched himself onto the rib. Such was the force and ferocity of Havoc's landing, the skull catapulted up out of the ground and came to rest at a jaunty angle. Havoc jumped off the rib to the ground and came to rest on his belly, allowing everyone to dismount. Uracil wound up the string and gave it to Freya as they joined Gio, who was still mourning the loss of Turkish Delight. "Good work," Requiem said as he slapped Gio on the shoulder. "Yes, good show," added Uracil. "But it came at a heavy price. We have casualties. Little, square, squidgy ones. What about them?" lamented Gio. Uracil offered him some solace. "They were sacrificed so that others may live. They would have wanted it this way, rather than being a calorific treat that will add to your ever-growing risk of heart attack." Uracil's mocking sincerity turned to thoughtfulness as he added, "But if we make it out of here alive, I'm sure I can get Robbie to make you some more." Requiem put his arms around them both, touched by the scene. "That's a nice gesture, Uracil, but I think all that Robbie is good for is... right now I can't think of anything." Unlike the others, Freya had not discounted the possibility that there were as many enraged undead elephants as there was dust on the ground. She fled through the nose hole of the great skull, calling out, "You can do your Mel bonding later. Let's get inside." Snapping to attention, Requiem, Gio and Uracil ran inside the skull and slid to a halt as they turned in unison to go back out. "Havoc!" they shouted. They needn't have worried. Before they could make their way back out, a tiny and dishevelled white kitten came in to join them, meowing merrily as he went. Getting close to the floor, her arms flung wide, a beaming smile on her face, Freya called, "Havoc!" in her cutest voice yet. Standing around her, the rest of the group stroked and thanked the tiny cat. All of them were now a little more wary of what they called him in the future, especially Gio. "I think we can thank the mystery man for this. Don't you agree, Gio?" said Freya self-righteously as she looked him in the eye. "I'll agree that this little fella probably isn't deaf." Requiem returned his attentions to their surroundings. The inside of the skull was much larger than its outside had led everyone to believe, and it echoed with his footsteps. Running his finger along the floor, it was clear that, like the walls and ceiling, it was indeed made of bone. Looking at his finger, trailing on the fine dust on the floor, Requiem wondered just where the bright white light that bathed the middle of the room was coming from. The rest of the group followed Requiem's gaze high up behind them to see two beams of white light flooding down through the eye sockets. Tearing himself away from the eerie lighting, Uracil walked ahead of the group. "Look at that! 4 doors!" he called. "Only one of them is open, though," added Freya, still holding Havoc. Gio walked past them both and examined the wall in between 2 doors. "Bookworm! We need a bookworm here!" he shouted. Needing no further invitation, Uracil walked despondently over to Gio. "What do you want, you great oaf?" "What's this? Is it Latin?" he said, pointing at an aged brass plaque. "Indeed," Uracil replied airily as he blew away the dust to reveal more words. "Basically, it says, 'As one door closes, another opens.'" Requiem stood in the gap between the next 2 doors. "Look, here's more." Preempting more bookworm requests, Uracil walked over. "This one translates as, 'Unlike Noah's animals, they go in one by one.'" Looking on, Freya gave her deduction. "Well, sounds simple enough. Only one person can go through a door, and once they've done, so another one will open." Looking down at Havoc in her arms and stroking him, she continued in mock sincerity, "Go on, brave Gio. Now's your chance to show us what you're made of." Requiem put his hand in front of Gio before he could rise to the bait. "Now hang on. I don't think we should be splitting up." "I don't think we have much of a choice," replied Uracil, who was sure that the Plaque's messages should not be taken lightly. "Let's see, shall we?" said Requiem defiantly. "Gio, you and I shall try to walk through that open door together. Ready?" "Indeed I am, my friend," replied Gio heartily. The door was easily wide enough for both Gio and Requiem to walk through side by side. They stood at the entrance and looked in. All they could see was black, and not a sound could be heard. Still staring forwards, Requiem spoke with determination. "Ready?" "Ready," Gio replied with equal grit, and both put a foot forwards. As they did so, one of the eye sockets closed, plunging half the room into darkness. "Gio! Requiem!" Freya called shakily. "Get back here! There are noises! Really unnerving noises!" "Eyes too!" Urisil jumped back to be close to Freya and Havoc. "And teeth! Sharp-looking teeth!" Stunned, Requiem and Gio looked at one another. "I think if we break any more rules, the other light will go out, and those that hide in the shadows will have their wicked way," said Requiem solemnly, annoyed that this time there was a rule he could not break. Gio was unconcerned. "Let me go first. I'm so hyper on Turkish delight right now, I'll go crazy if I don't burn it off." Requiem put his hand on Gio's shoulder, grateful that he had such a steadfast friend. "Fair enough. Be careful, my friend." Requiem knew he need say nothing else, and walked back into the entrance hall, leaving their fate in Gio's hands. Gio took a deep breath, and, without looking back, plunged into the darkness. The door slammed shut behind him. Gio was now totally alone in the dark, his friends waiting on the other side for him to come through for them. Back in the entrance hall, the others sat in the brightest light they could find, whilst voices in a foreign tongue chattered all around them. "Why didn't another door open?" asked Freya. Sighing, Urisil answered, "I dare say Gio has to accomplish some kind of task before the next door opens. After all, there is such great knowledge held in the vaults. I'm sure the Inquisitor wants to ensure any of those that make it to him are deserving." Requiem played with Havoc on the floor, seemingly unconcerned. "All we can do is wait. At the end of the day, if there's one person anyone can depend on, it's Gio.